The night my daughter sent the emergency code I had taught her as a child, I knew she was in danger. 20 minutes later, I was standing outside my ex-husband's lake house, while police cars, veteran responders, and flashing lights filled the driveway. Inside, my daughter's fiancé was holding a gun. Outside, the man who had spent 31 years calling me weak was about to hear someone call me Commander Mercer. What neither of them knew was that the quiet bookstore owner they had underestimated for decades had spent 24 years living a life she never talked about. My name is Serafina Vale Mercer, and before that stormy night was over, my daughter would finally understand who I really was. And my ex-husband would realize he had spent most of his life laughing at the wrong woman. Chapter 1: The night everything changed 12 years after my divorce. I thought there were very few things left that could surprise Grant Mercer. I was wrong. Rain hammered the windshield as I stepped out of the black SUV and onto the gravel driveway leading to the lake house at Lake Gaston. The beam from a security light cut through the darkness. Somewhere beyond the trees, thunder rolled across the water. I could see Grant stand on the front porch. Even from a distance, I recognized the look on his face: confusion, disbelief, fear. The same man who had spent 31 years telling people I was too timid to order food at a crowded restaurant was staring at me, as if he had never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Behind me, another SUV rolled to a stop, then another. Thomas Harris climbed out first. 2 members of the veteran response team followed him. One of them moved quickly toward me. Commander Mercer. Its were set on the east side, the words hung in the air. Grant froze. For a moment, even the rain seemed quieter. Candor. I watched his expression change. He looked from me to Thomas, then to the others, then back to me, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly no longer made sense. How can a man spend more than 30 years beside someone and never truly know who she is? That question would stay with me long after that night. But to understand why I was standing outside that lake house in the middle of a storm, you have to go back a few hours. Back to dinner. Back to the moment I realized history was about to repeat itself. The evening had started like dozens of family gatherings before it. Grant had invited everyone over for dinner. Ava and Ethan were there. Eleanor was there. A few cousins. A couple of old family friends. The house was warm. The food smelled good. Everyone laughed. Everything looked normal. That's what dangerous situations often look like from the outside. Normal. I was carrying a bowl of roasted vegetables into the dining room when I heard Grant telling a story. He was smiling. Everyone else was smiling too. Years ago, Serafina jumped out of her skin when fireworks went off over the harbor. A few people chuckled. Grant shook his head. She's always been scared of everything. More laughter. I set the bowl on the table. No one noticed that I didn't laugh. No one noticed because this wasn't unusual. It was familiar. Grant had spent decades turning me into a harmless joke, not out of cruelty, not entirely. It was simply the role everyone expected me to play. The quiet woman, the timid woman, the fragile woman, the woman who needed protecting. The strange thing was that, after enough years, even intelligent people stop questioning a story they've heard 1,000 times. I took my seat and smiled politely, the same way I always had. A memory surfaced. Ava was 12 years old. Her bicycle chain had snapped. Grant was out of town. I fixed it in less than 15 minutes. When he came home, Ava proudly told him, "Mom fixed it all by herself." Grant laughed. "Looks like she got lucky." Everyone laughed, including me. Another memory, a hurricane warning had knocked out power across the neighborhood. People were panicking. I organized flashlights, batteries, water, and emergency supplies. 3 days later, I overheard Grant telling a neighbor, "You should have seen Serafina." She was terrified. The neighbor laughed. Grant laughed. I stayed quiet. Then there was the parent conference. A teacher praised me for helping Ava through a difficult year. Before I could answer, Grant leaned back in his chair. That's probably the most words she's spoken all month. The room laughed again. I smiled again. The truth was simple. Nobody hated me. Nobody wanted to hurt me. They just never really saw me. Halfway through dinner, I started paying attention to Ethan. Not because he was loud, not because he was rude. Actually, he was very polite. That's what made it dangerous. Ava mentioned a counseling position she was considering in Raleigh. Before she could finish, Ethan answered for her. "It's not really the right fit." Ava looked at him, then she smiled. "Right. Maybe not. A few minutes later, she started telling a story from work. Ethan interrupted twice to correct details that didn't matter. When she talked about attending a professional training conference, I noticed something change in his expression, a flicker, barely visible. But it was there. Disapproval. Ava immediately shifted the subject. That caught my attention. Later, Eleanor asked Ava a simple question. "What do you think?" Ava glanced at Ethan before answering. Not once, not twice, every single time the room didn't notice. I did, because I had spent years doing exactly the same thing. You learn to check someone's face before speaking. You learn which opinions are safe. You learn how to make yourself smaller. You learn how to keep the peace. Most people call it compromise. Sometimes it has another name. I looked across the table. Ethan was smiling. Grant was laughing. Everyone seemed happy, yet a knot formed in my stomach. I had seen this pattern before, and I knew where it could lead. The evening ended shortly after 9. People hugged. People said goodbye. Ava walked me to my car. The rain had already started. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around me. The hug lasted longer than usual. Long enough for me to notice. Long enough to feel the tension in her shoulders. "You okay, sweetheart?" She stepped back and smiled. The smile never reached her eyes. "I'm fine," I nodded. But I didn't believe her, not completely. As I drove back toward Norfolk, windshield wipers pushing away sheets of rain, I couldn't stop thinking about that hug. Or the way Ethan had watched her all evening, or the way she'd looked at him before speaking. The highway was mostly empty. Thunder flashed over the horizon. I turned up the radio, then my phone vibrated. One text message, 4 words, Blue Harbor. No sunrise. Every muscle in my body tightened. The radio faded into silence. My hands locked around the steering wheel. Nobody else would have understood those words. To anyone else, they meant nothing. To me, they meant everything. When Ava was young, we created family emergency codes, not because I was paranoid. Because life had taught me that someday she might need help, and not be able to ask for it directly. Over the years, we reviewed them together, again and again, as naturally as fire drills, as naturally as seatbelts. Blue Harbor. No sunrise. The meaning was clear. I am in danger. I cannot talk. Come now. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. Then something happened that hadn't happened in a very long time. The part of me I had buried beneath years of quiet routines suddenly woke up. The part that knew how to assess risk. The part that knew how to move when seconds mattered. The part that never ignored a distress signal. I pulled onto the shoulder of the highway. Rain slammed against the roof. My phone was already in my hand. There was only one person I was going to call, Thomas Harris. And as the line began to ring, I knew that whatever was happening to my daughter, our lives nazes are about to change. Chapter 2. The woman nobody really. Knew. Thomas answered on the second ring. Serafina. He did not sound surprised. Men like Thomas Harris did not waste breath on surprise. I kept my eyes on the rain-blurred road ahead and said, Ava used the emergency phrase. There was 1 second of silence, not confusion, not disbelief. Just the sound of an old operator shifting from sleep into command. Where Grant Mercer's lake house, north side of Lake Gaston. Ethan Cross is there with her. Another pause. Then Thomas said, "We are already 20 minutes east of you. Training weekend with the Veterans Crisis Response Network. I have 3 vehicles, 2 medics, and Daniel Ruiz is being notified through county dispatch. You do not enter alone." I almost smiled at that. Thomas had known me too long to believe I would obey that last sentence if my daughter was in danger. "I'm turning around now," I said. "Serafina," he said, and his voice softened just enough for me to hear the concern beneath the discipline. "Is she able to call?" "No." "Do you know the threat?" "Not yet. Then we keep it clean. We observe. We call it in. We support law enforcement. Nobody plays hero." I looked at my own reflection in the windshield, pale face, wet hair, bookstore cardigan, hands steady on the wheel. I said, "I stopped playing hero a long time ago." Thomas did not answer immediately. Then he said, 18 minutes, the line went dead. I pulled back onto the highway and pressed the gas harder than I should have on wet pavement. The tires hissed against the road. Rain beat against the truck roof like handfuls of gravel. Every mile between me and that lake house felt like an accusation. Ava had used the code. That meant she could not speak freely. That meant Ethan was close enough to hear. That meant whatever I had seen at dinner had not been imagination. The old part of my mind began arranging facts without asking permission. Ethan's hand tightening around his glass. Ava's eyes lowering before she answered. The way he had smiled too quickly whenever someone looked at him. Grant laughing at the table, unaware that his daughter was sitting beside a man whose anger had edges. I drove faster. The world outside was black and silver. Water ran in sheets across the road. Pine trees rose on both sides like silent witnesses. For years, people had asked me easy questions. How was the bookstore? Was I still living near the marina? Did I ever think about dating again? Nobody asked the questions that mattered. Nobody ever asked if I was afraid. Nobody asked if I was lonely. Nobody asked what it cost a person to return from places she was never allowed to describe, then sit at a dinner table while the man she once loved joked that she was scared of her own shadow. That was the strange cruelty of ordinary life. You survive things nobody can imagine, then come home and get reduced to a family joke. I had let Grant do that, not because it did not hurt, because explaining myself had always felt more exhausting than being misunderstood. By the time I reached the county road, my breathing had changed. Slower, deeper, measured. I had not thought about those old rhythms in years, but the body remembers what the mind tries to retire. Another pair of headlights appeared behind me. Then another, Thomas. I turned down the narrow road toward Grant's property. The lake house sat at the end of a long gravel drive, tucked behind pines and wet darkness. Lights burned in the windows. Too many lights. The porch lamp flickered in the rain. I pulled in first. Thomas's SUV stopped behind me. A second vehicle angled across the driveway, blocking the exit but leaving room for sheriff's deputies to enter. No sirens. No drama. Just movement. Thomas stepped out in a dark rain jacket. His gray hair was plastered slightly at the temples, and his face had the calm, tired focus of a man who had seen too many bad nights and knew how quickly they could get worse. He walked toward me. "Dispatch confirmed Ruiz is 2 minutes out," he said. "One deputy is closer. We stay outside unless there is immediate threat to life." I nodded. A younger man came up behind him, carrying a medical bag. "We have movement through the front window," he said. 3 visible. 1 male pacing. 1 female near the kitchen. 1 older male near the hallway. My stomach tightened. Ava. I moved toward the porch. Thomas caught my arm, not hard, just enough. "Serafina." I looked at him. He saw my face and let go. We approached through the rain. Halfway across the yard, a crash came from inside. Glass or ceramic, something heavy hitting hardwood. Then Grant's voice carried through the walls, strained and panicked. "Ethan, put it down. For God's sake, son, put it down." Every sound in the night sharpened. Thomas spoke into his radio. "Possible weapon inside. Deputies inbound. We are holding perimeter." Then Ava screamed. Not a dramatic scream. Not the kind people make in movies. It was short, broken, terrified. I moved before anyone could stop me. Thomas was beside me instantly. We reached the porch as another voice shouted from inside. Ethan's voice. High, angry, cracking at the edges. "Everybody keeps trying to take her from me." I stood beside the door and listened for 1 breath, then another. My fear was alive inside me. It moved through my ribs, my throat, my hands. I was not calm because I felt nothing. I was calm because fear had never been allowed to drive. A deputy's cruiser turned into the driveway, lights flashing silently through the rain. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz stepped out fast, 1 hand near his holster but not drawn. He had the compact build and alert eyes of a man who understood rural emergencies were never as simple as the call described. Thomas spoke quickly with him. Ruiz looked at me. "You the mother." I nodded. "Can you talk him down?" I looked through the window. Ethan stood near the fireplace with a revolver in 1 shaking hand. Ava was backed against the kitchen counter, face wet with tears, both hands visible. Grant stood between them but too far from either to help. I said, "I can try." Ruiz studied me for half a second, then nodded once. Door was unlocked. He pushed it open and called out in a firm voice, "Sheriff's office." "Ethan, keep the weapon pointed down." I stepped in just behind him. The living room looked like a storm had passed through it. A broken lamp. Whiskey across the floor. 1 dining chair overturned. Rain and lake wind rattled the windows. Ava saw me first. Her face collapsed with relief and fear all at once. "Mom." Ethan turned. For a second he looked almost offended, like I had interrupted a private conversation. "You need to leave," he snapped. I took 1 step forward, not toward the gun. Toward his eyes. "Ethan," I said, my voice low and steady. "You are scared. You are angry. And you are about 10 seconds away from making a decision. you cannot undo. His hand tightened around the revolver. Ruiz did not move. Thomas and his team remained behind the threshold, visible, but still. No one rushed him. No one shouted over me. Ethan's breathing came fast. She was going to leave, he said. After everything I did for her. Ava shook her head, crying silently. I kept my gaze on him. If you wanted her to stay, I said. This is the worst possible way to ask. His mouth twisted. You don't know anything. I know control feels like safety when you are afraid, I said. I know humiliation can turn into anger if a man does not know what to do with shame. And I know if you raise that gun again, Sheriff Ruiz will have no choice. Ethan looked toward Ruiz, then back at me. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. I softened my voice, set it on the floor. He swallowed. No one moved. The grandfather clock in Grant's hallway ticked louder than it had any right to. Ava's hands shook against the counter. Grant stood pale and useless, his eyes darting between the gun and me, as if he could not reconcile what he was seeing. I said again, set it down, Ethan. Then sit in the chair, his arm lowered an inch, then another. The revolver slipped from his hand onto the rug. Ruiz moved quickly, controlled and practiced, kicking the weapon away before securing Ethan against the wall. Another deputy entered behind him. Thomas's medic crossed to Ava, but she pushed past him and ran into my arms. I held her so tightly I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. I've got you, I whispered. You're safe. You're safe now. She trembled like a child, even though she was 34 years old. Across the room, Grant stared at me. Not at Ethan, not at the deputies, at me. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked as if the floor under his life had shifted. One of Thomas's men stepped in to give Ruiz a short update. He was young, probably mid-30s, former Marine by the posture, though he would have corrected anyone who called him former. He glanced toward me without thinking and said, Commander Mercer, perimeter is clear. The room went silent. Ruiz looked at me again. Thomas looked down. Ava froze in my arms. Grant's face lost what little color it had left. He whispered the word like it belonged to someone else. Commander. I kept one arm around my daughter. I did not answer right away. There are moments when the truth does not need a speech. It simply stands in the room and waits for everyone else to catch up. Grant stared at me, really stared. Perhaps for the first time in 31 years, and in his eyes, I saw the beginning of something I had never expected from him. Doubt. Not doubt in me, doubt in himself. Chapter 3, The Life, My Family. Never saw 3 days after the lake house. Ava came to stay with me in Norfolk. She arrived with 2 duffel bags, 1 cardboard box, and the look of someone who had escaped a burning building but could still smell smoke in her hair. I lived above the bookstore then, in a narrow apartment overlooking the marina. It was not elegant. The floors creaked in winter. The kitchen window stuck if it rained. The pipes made strange noises after midnight. But it was quiet. That was what Ava needed first. Not advice, not questions. Quiet. The first week, she barely slept. I would hear her pacing upstairs at 2 in the morning, soft steps moving from the guest room to the bathroom, then back again. Sometimes the shower ran for 40 minutes. Sometimes she sat on the stairs in the dark, wrapped in the old quilt I kept over the arm of the couch. I never forced her to talk. Fear does not leave the body just because the danger is gone. It lingers in the shoulders, in the jaw, in the way a grown woman apologizes for using too much coffee creamer in her own mother's kitchen. One morning, she stood by the sink, holding a chipped mug and said, I'm sorry I'm being so much trouble. I looked up from the toaster. You are my daughter, Ava. You are not trouble. Her face crumpled for half a second before she turned away. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the bruised fear. Not even the memory of Ethan's gun on Grant's rug. It was watching her search every room for permission to exist. Megan Flores came by on the 8th day. She brought soup from a deli near Ghent, a stack of magazines Ava would never read, and the kind of nervous energy people bring when they have wanted to say something for a long time. Ava sat across from her at my small kitchen table. Megan twisted the lid off a container and said, I should have pushed harder. Ava blinked. About what? Megan looked at me, then back at Ava. About Ethan. The air changed. Ava's fingers tightened around her spoon. Megan, no, I need to say it. Megan's voice shook, but she kept going. I saw it, the way he corrected you, the way he made jokes that weren't jokes, the way you started asking if he'd be okay with things before you even knew what you wanted. Ava stared at the table. I thought you didn't like him. I didn't. But that wasn't the point. I was scared if I said too much, you'd pull away from me. Ava gave a small laugh that had no humor in it. I did pull away. Megan's eyes filled. I know. Later that same afternoon, Olivia Harper called. She was one of Ava's colleagues from the school counseling department. Ava put her on speaker while we sat in the living room, rain sliding down the windows. Olivia's voice was gentle. Ava, I wasn't sure if I should say this now, but I think you need to hear it. Ethan called the office twice last fall, asking whether the Raleigh position would require evening hours. Ava looked up slowly. What? He said he was helping you compare options. I thought it was strange, but he sounded so normal. Then after your interview, I heard from the recruiter that you'd withdrawn. I didn't withdraw, Ava whispered. I felt something cold move through me. Olivia went silent for a moment. Oh, Ava. Ava stood up too fast, knocking the blanket from her lap. I need my laptop. She went upstairs and came down with it tucked under one arm. Her hands shook as she opened it on the table. Megan stayed beside her. I stood behind them both, close enough to help, far enough not to crowd. Ava searched her old email, Raleigh counseling position, then recruiter, then withdrawal, nothing. She checked archived messages, nothing. Then Megan said, check sent mail. Ava did, there it was. A message sent from Ava's account 6 months earlier, to the Raleigh District Hiring Coordinator. Thank you for the opportunity. But after further consideration, I am no longer able to relocate at this time. Ava did not speak. She just stared. Her eyes moved over the words again and again, as if repetition might make them less real. I didn't write that, she said. I leaned closer. The timestamp showed 11:48 p.m. I remembered that week. Ava had been staying with Ethan after a conference. She had called me once from his guest room and sounded strange, tired, distant. Megan covered her mouth. Ava scrolled further. A reply from the recruiter. We are sorry to hear that. Your references were excellent, and the committee was very impressed. Ava put one hand against her chest. He told me they had gone with someone else. No one answered. There are moments when silence is not empty. It is full of everything people are finally understanding. Ava closed the laptop slowly. Then she stood, walked to the bathroom, and shut the door. I heard her crying through the wood. Megan looked at me. I'm sorry. I shook my head. You told the truth. That matters. That evening, after Megan left, Ava came downstairs wearing one of my old navy sweatshirts. She looked younger than 34. Younger than the woman I had pulled into my arms at the lake house. Younger than the counselor who had spent years teaching teenagers how to name unhealthy behavior while failing to name her own. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. The rain had returned. It tapped against the glass in soft, uneven rhythms. For a long time she said nothing. Then she whispered, Mom. I looked up. Who are you really? I had known the question was coming. Still, it landed in my chest like something heavy. I set my tea down and folded my hands around the cup. I'm still your mother. She shook her head. You know what I mean. Yes, I knew. I stood slowly and walked to the hall closet. Behind old winter coats and a box of Christmas ornaments sat a green military trunk with brass latches dulled by age. I had not opened it in years. Maybe because I did not need the memories. Maybe because I had never wanted Ava to carry them. The latches clicked louder than I expected. Ava came to stand beside me. Inside were the pieces of a life my family had never seen. Photographs, Storvefas records, medals, commendation letters, challenge coins worn smooth at the edges. Ava reached down and lifted one photograph with both hands. It showed me much younger, standing beside 3 men near an airfield overseas. My hair was pulled back, my face was sunburned. My eyes looked harder than the eyes Ava knew. That's you? Yes. She sat down on the floor without looking away from the photo. I placed more items beside her, a Navy commendation, a folded flag from a memorial service, a coin from a unit whose name was not printed anywhere civilians would recognize. Ava touched one medal with the tip of her finger. Dad knew. He knew I served. But not this. No. Why didn't you tell us? I sat across from her on the floor, because in some ways I was too tired to explain, because some things were classified, because silence became easier than translation. Because your father mistook what I could not say for what I would not share. But those were complicated answers. The true one was simpler. I didn't know how. Ava looked at me then, for the first time, not like a daughter looking at her mother, but like one woman looking at another. I thought you were scared all the time. I smiled faintly. I was. She frowned. That answer confused her. I reached for one of the challenge coins and turned it in my palm. I was scared almost every day. Sweetheart, before operations, during them, after them, when phones rang at odd hours, when cars slowed outside safe houses, when men I worked with did not come home, her eyes filled. But you always seemed so calm. Calm is not the absence of fear. Calm is what you do with fear when panic would get someone killed. The room went very still. Ava looked at the photographs, then at the medals, then at me. Her breath broke. All those years, I thought Dad was the strong one. I did not answer. She wiped her face with the sleeve of my sweatshirt. And then I almost married a younger version of him. Those words seemed to frighten her as soon as she said them. I moved closer and took her hand. You were taught to keep peace. She nodded, crying silently. I changed how I talked, what I wore, which friends I saw. I stopped mentioning Raleigh because his face changed every time I did. I told myself it was compromise. I know. She looked at me. You really do, don't you? Yes. And that hurt us both, because for years I had believed hiding my pain protected her. But children learn the shape of love by watching the adults around them. Even the quiet lessons. Especially the quiet ones. Ava picked up the email printout from the table beside us. She had printed it earlier, maybe because proof felt more solid on paper. He stole a life from me before I even had the chance to choose it. I squeezed her hand. He tried to. She looked at me through tears. What happens now? Now you stop letting him write your story. She nodded, but her eyes drifted back to the trunk. Then came the question I had been dreading. Did Dad know all of this? I looked down at the old coins in my palm. The rain kept falling. The apartment smelled faintly of tea, old paper, and salt from the marina. He knew I served in the Navy. Ava waited. I looked at her and told the truth. He just never tried to understand who I had to become to survive it. Chapter 4. The truth Grant couldn't escape next morning. Alikiad. Ava carried the printed email to the Chesapeake courthouse with both hands, as if it were a fragile thing that might disappear if she loosened her grip. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz had already filed his incident report from the lake house. Ethan Cross was out on bond by then, temporarily staying with his mother in Virginia Beach, and calling himself misunderstood to anyone willing to listen. The official charges were still being reviewed, but the facts were not friendly to him. A firearm had been present. Ava had been trapped in the house. Deputies had witnessed enough of his behavior to know this was not just an argument that got loud. Still, the legal system does not move on outrage. It moves on statements, records, filings, dates, and signatures. I went with Ava to the protective order hearing, because she asked me to sit in the back, not beside her, not in front, just close enough that if her courage gave out, she could turn her head and see me. When the judge asked her why she believed she needed protection, Ava stood with her hands flat against the table. Her voice shook at first, then it steadied. Ethan made me afraid to speak in my own life. The courtroom was small and plain, with fluorescent lights and squaffed wooden benches. Nothing about it looked dramatic. But I have learned that some of the most important battles happen in rooms that look ordinary. Ava described the lake house, the gun, the shouting, the way Ethan blocked the door. Then she described the emails, the Raleigh job, the message sent from her account. The judge listened without expression. Ethan sat at the other table with his attorney. He kept shaking his head slightly, as if the whole thing offended him. When it was his turn, he stood and said, "I never hurt her. I was emotional. She knows how to push me." Ava flinched. I saw it, so did the judge. The temporary protective order was granted that afternoon. Outside the courthouse, Ava let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for years. Megan Flores met us on the sidewalk with coffee neither of us wanted. "You did it," Megan said. Ava looked down at the paper in her hand. "No," she said softly. "I just finally stopped pretending it wasn't happening." 2 days later, a woman named Lisa Warren called Ava. Ava put the phone on speaker at my kitchen table because she did not trust herself to hear it alone. Lisa's voice was quiet, careful. "I dated Ethan 4 years ago." Ava closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," Lisa said. "I should have reached out sooner. I saw the court filing. I knew that pattern." "What pattern?" Ava asked. Lisa took a breath. "At first he was protective. Then he was concerned. Then he was checking my phone and asking why I needed certain friends. Then he started showing up at my office." Ava pressed one hand to her mouth. Lisa continued. "I filed for a protective order in Henrico County. I withdrew it later because he cried in the parking lot and told me I was ruining his life. After that, I moved apartments twice. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ava whispered, "So it wasn't just me." "No," Lisa said. "It was never just you." That sentence changed something in my daughter. Pain isolates people. It convinces them that if they had been smarter, firmer, prettier, calmer, more patient, things would have been different. Hearing Lisa broke that spell. Ethan had not lost control once. He had practiced control for years. The prosecution moved forward carefully. There was the protective order, then a victim statement, then negotiations between the Commonwealth's attorney and Ethan's lawyer. Because no shots had been fired and because Ava did not want a trial, if it could be avoided, Ethan was offered a plea agreement. Unlawful firearm possession related to the incident, criminal intimidation, mandatory counseling, supervised probation, and no contact with Ava. It was not the kind of justice people imagine when they are angry. It was paperwork justice. Courtroom justice. The kind that does not feel satisfying until you understand that a record can follow a man further than a shouted accusation ever could. Before the plea was entered, Ethan sent Ava a letter through his attorney. She almost threw it away. Then she decided to read it with me in the room. It was 3 pages long. Not an apology, not really. He wrote that she had embarrassed him, that she had let her mother turn her against him, that his career in real estate had been damaged because she overreacted, that he hoped someday she would understand what pressure did to a man. Ava folded the letter slowly, then she laughed once. It was small, sharp, free. "He still thinks this is about what happened to him," I said. "That is usually how men like that survive their own conscience." She slid the letter into a folder for the attorney. Across town, Grant was beginning his own investigation. I did not ask him to. Thomas told me later that Grant had called him 3 times, before Thomas finally agreed to meet him at a diner off Route 58. Grant did not go there angry. That surprised me. He went there carrying a notebook. According to Thomas, Grant sat in a booth, ordered black coffee, and asked one question. What did she actually do? Thomas Harris was not sentimental. He did not embellish. He did not tell stories for drama. He gave Grant what could be given: dates, assignments that were no longer classified, commendations, the outline of a career that had existed under Grant's roof like a locked room he had never bothered to enter. Grant listened at first, probably with disbelief, then with discomfort, then with something closer to shame. Thomas later told me. He kept asking why you never said anything. I said, "What did you tell him?" Thomas looked at me for a long moment. I told him some people spend their whole lives making it unsafe for the truth to come out, then act surprised when nobody tells them. I did not know what to say to that. A week later, Grant asked Ava if he could look through copies of some of my old photographs. She called me first. "Do you want me to say no?" I thought about it. No. Let him look. Grant sat alone at Ava's dining table, with a stack of scanned photos and service documents. I heard about it afterward, not from him, but from Ava. There was one file that broke him, a commendation from October 2004. I had been part of an operation overseas that helped evacuate a group of civilian contractors during a crisis. The public wording was vague, as it always was, but the date was clear: October 16, 2004, Ava's 10th birthday. Grant had been furious that year. I remembered it exactly. He had told everyone I was selfish, that no job was important enough to miss my daughter blowing out candles. He had let Ava believe I had chosen work over her. The truth was that I had spent that night in a place I was not allowed to name, helping people get home to their families. Grant read the date, then read it again. Ava told me he took off his glasses, covered his face with both hands, and did not speak for nearly 5 minutes. When he finally did, his voice was broken. I made her the villain for that. Ava did not comfort him. I was proud of her for that. Some realizations need to sit with the person who earned them. By then, the story had started moving through the places. Stories move in coastal Virginia. The marina, church parking lots, the breakfast counter near the hardware store, the veteran center near Chesapeake. People did not know the details, but they knew enough. They knew Ethan had been arrested. They knew Ava was safe. They knew a group of veterans had shown up at Grant Mercer's lake house because of Serafina. They knew Grant had spent years joking about a woman other people apparently respected deeply. One Sunday, Eleanor said to Ava after church, "Maybe none of us really knew your mother." Ava answered, "Maybe none of you tried." I wish I had been there to hear it. The third room that went silent happened at the Veterans Center. Thomas had asked me to stop by to sign paperwork for a fundraiser. I almost refused. I did not like rooms full of people who looked at me with newly discovered curiosity. But Ava wanted to come, and I was trying to let her see me without hiding. Grant was there too, standing near the coffee table, awkward as a boy at his first school dance. I ignored him at first, then an old man near the window stood up. He was tall, thin, with a cane in one hand and a navy cap in the other, Samuel Brooks. I had not seen him in more than 20 years, his eyes fixed on my face. Then he straightened as much as his body allowed. Commander Vale. The room went quiet, not polite quiet, recognizing quiet. The kind that settles when people understand they have been standing beside history without knowing it. Samuel's voice trembled. I never got to thank you. I looked at him and felt the past move under my feet. You made it home, Sam. He nodded. Because of you. No one spoke, not Thomas, not Ava, not Grant. I could feel Grant watching me from across the room. For once there was no joke waiting in his mouth. No smirk, no story to make himself comfortable. Just the heavy silence of a man, realizing that the woman he had called weak for most of his adult life had once carried people through storms he could not even imagine. And for the first time, I think Grant understood that he had not been married to a timid woman. He had been married to someone he was never brave enough to know. Chapter 5. The apology, I never expected 12 months can change a life more than 12 years of surviving it. By the following spring, Ava was living in Raleigh. The first apartment she rented was small, bright, and entirely her own. No one checked her phone. No one questioned where she went. No one made her feel guilty for succeeding. Mom, I visited. The first time, she showed me the office where she worked. She had completed advanced trauma counseling certification and joined a program that helped women recovering from emotional abuse and coercive relationships. I watched her through a glass window one afternoon. She was speaking to a young woman sitting across from her, gentle-pottered, confident. For a moment I forgot I was looking at my daughter. I was looking at a professional who had finally stepped into her own life. When she finished, she came outside carrying 2 coffees. You were staring. I smiled. I was admiring. She laughed, a real laugh, not the nervous one she used to use when she wanted everyone around her to stay comfortable. The real one, that alone felt like a miracle. The legal process with Ethan eventually came to an end. He accepted the plea agreement, mandatory counseling, probation, no contact provisions, permanent records that would follow him far longer than his excuses ever could. The last thing Ava ever heard from him was through attorneys. No dramatic confrontation, no grand speech, just consequences. Real life rarely provides perfect revenge. What it offers instead is accountability, and sometimes that is enough. As for Grant, life had its own plans. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was organizing a shipment of books when my phone rang. It was Ava. Her voice sounded strange. Mom. I immediately stopped what I was doing. What happened? It's Dad. My stomach tightened. What about him? He had a heart attack. For a second, the world seemed to pause. Not because Grant was still my husband. He wasn't. Not because I still loved him romantically. I didn't. But because 31 years leaves fingerprints on a life. No matter how things end, the attack had been mild. The doctors expected a full recovery. Still, I drove to Chesapeake Regional Medical Center that afternoon. Grant looked smaller in a hospital bed. Older human. There are few things in life that strip away ego faster than mortality. He stared out the window when I entered, then slowly turned toward me. Neither of us spoke at first. The room hummed softly with hospital machinery. Finally, he said, I wasn't sure you'd come. I pulled up a chair. I wasn't sure either. A faint smile crossed his face, then disappeared. For several moments he simply looked at me, not as a former wife, not as a mystery, just as a person. Then he sighed. I owe you an apology. I said nothing, he continued. I've rehearsed it about 100 times. I almost laughed. That sounded exactly like Grant trying to prepare for honesty. His eyes drifted toward the window again. You know what scares me the most? What? You were always calmer than me. That wasn't the answer I expected. He swallowed. I hated that. I remained silent. You'd sit there while I was angry, while I was frustrated, while I was making noise, and you never reacted the way I wanted. The truth settled between us. Not comfortable, not pleasant, but honest. Grant shook his head. I told myself it meant you were weak. His voice cracked slightly. "But the truth is, I thought it meant you were stronger than me." For the first time in a very long time, I saw no defensiveness in him, no joke, no performance, just a tired man facing himself. "I didn't understand you," he said. "So I made fun of you." I looked down at my hands. Years ago I would have cried hearing those words. Now I mostly felt sad, not for myself, for both of us. "I wasn't easy to understand," I admitted. Grant blinked. I continued. "The military taught me how to endure things. I searched for the right words. It didn't teach me how to explain them." He nodded slowly. "I know, no, Grant, I don't think you do." He looked surprised, so I kept going. "I got very good at surviving, very good at carrying things, very good at staying quiet." The room remained still. "But I never learned how to let people help me carry them." For a moment neither of us spoke, then Grant laughed softly, a tired laugh. "We really were a disaster together." I smiled. "Sometimes." His eyes filled unexpectedly. "I robbed Ava of understanding you. That one hurt because it was true. But it wasn't the whole truth." I leaned forward slightly, and I let it happen. Grant stared at me. I continued. "I thought keeping peace was protecting her." The silence that followed felt different. Lighter. Not because everything was fixed, because nothing needed defending anymore. Two imperfect people were finally telling the truth. When I left the hospital that evening, neither of us had asked for another chance. There would be no reunion, no romance, no fairy tale, just forgiveness. Sometimes that is the greater miracle. A year later, Ava hosted a barbecue at her house in Raleigh. The weather was perfect. Children played in the yard. Neighbors carried folding chairs across the grass. Music drifted from a portable speaker. For the first time in years, nobody seemed afraid. Megan was there. Olivia was there. Thomas Harris came down from Virginia. Even Grant attended. He looked healthier, a little thinner, a little humbler. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, people gathered around picnic tables under strings of lights. Someone asked how everyone knew each other. A simple question. The kind that usually produces simple answers. I expected Ava to answer. Instead, Grant stood. Conversation slowly faded. He looked around the table. Then his eyes settled on me. For one brief second, I saw nervousness. The same nervousness I had seen before his apology. Then he cleared his throat. "This is Serafina Vale Mercer." The entire table grew quiet. Grant kept looking at me. Not away, not past me, at me. Then he said the words I never expected to hear. "She spent 24 years protecting people most of us will never meet." The silence deepened. Even the children seemed quieter. Grant smiled, a small, honest smile, and I spent a long time not understanding who she really was. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The room went silent. Moment number 4, not because of military service, not because of awards, not because of mystery, because recognition had finally arrived. After decades, when the evening ended, Ava and I walked down the sidewalk while the last colors of sunset faded over Raleigh. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of peaceful that can only exist after enough storms have passed. Ava slipped her hands into her jacket pockets. Then she asked a question that stayed with me. "Do you regret anything?" I thought about it for a long time. The answer would have been easy years ago. Now it wasn't. Finally I nodded. "I do." "What?" I watched the last light disappear beyond the trees. "I regret living so long without letting people know me." Ava looked at me, not with pity, not with sadness, with understanding, the thing I had spent most of my life missing. We continued walking, and for the first time, neither of us needed to explain ourselves. For years, people thought I stayed quiet because I was weak. The truth was much simpler. I stayed quiet because life had already taught me how loud fear can be. I learned that strength is not making people afraid of you. It is making the people you love feel safe. It is choosing dignity when anger would be easier. It is surviving without becoming cruel. And sometimes, it is waiting long enough for the truth to speak for itself. If you've ever been underestimated because you were quiet, or if someone spent years misunderstanding your strength, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if stories about resilience, healing, and unexpected justice speak to you, stay with us for the next journey. Sometimes the most powerful victories are not the ones where we defeat someone else. They are the ones where we finally allow ourselves to be seen.